I never thought I'd be the kind of person to spill my personal life on the internet. But here I am, sitting in my tiny apartment, fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to figure out where to start. Maybe I'm doing this because I'm at my breaking point, or maybe I just need to scream into the void. Either way, let's get into it. My younger brother, Aaron, has always been the golden child. Even when we were kids, it was crystal clear to anyone who spent 5 minutes with my family. Aaron could do no wrong, at least in my parents' eyes. If his toy broke, Mom would rush in with hugs and soft words about how sensitive he was. If my toy broke, well, I'd get told to stop being a baby and fix it myself. It wasn't just small things either. Growing up, everything in our household revolved around Aaron. Mom called it nurturing his potential, but to me, it felt like being shoved aside to make room for his spotlight. Dad had his own reasons for idolizing him. You see, Dad had dreamed of being a doctor but never made it past his first year in college. Aaron, on the other hand, was supposed to be his second chance, a way for Dad to finally feel like he'd made it through his son. Me? I was just Luke. I wasn't brilliant, sensitive, or particularly demanding of their attention. I got good grades, kept out of trouble, and rarely asked for much. That combination earned me, well, not much at all. Looking back, I think I figured it out around high school. If I didn't need as much, I'd simply get ignored. But here's the kicker. I didn't really mind at first. I liked being independent. And if being low maintenance meant I didn't have to deal with their drama, I considered it a win. That all started to change during my senior year of high school. When I got a full scholarship to study computer science, I thought it would be a big deal. A moment my parents could finally be proud of me. I was wrong. I still remember standing in the kitchen with the acceptance letter, my heart pounding as I handed it to Mom. She glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds, nodded, and said, "That's nice, honey. Could you help Aaron with his applications later?" That was it. My big moment, crushed under the weight of Aaron's mediocrity. While I was thriving academically, Aaron was just scraping by, barely pulling C's in biology. But if you'd been around my parents, you'd think he was a teenage prodigy. Mom would gush about how dedicated he was, spinning every minor achievement into something grand. Meanwhile, I got a polite nod and a half-hearted good job before the conversation shifted back to Aaron. It wasn't just academics either. When I started dating Emily during my senior year, I was smitten. She was kind, hardworking, and practical, in a way that put everyone else our age to shame. Emily worked part-time at a coffee shop while saving up for her dream of becoming a graphic designer. To me, she was everything. To my parents, she was just a high school girlfriend. When Thanksgiving rolled around, I asked if Emily could join us for dinner. Mom shut that down instantly, saying, "It's just puppy love, Luke. Don't make it a big deal." But you know who did get to bring all his girlfriends to family dinners? Aaron. Every girl he dated was treated like royalty. They were given slices of Mom's homemade pie, showered with attention, and always invited back. Watching that double standard play out over and over, it stung. But Emily and I made it work despite them. We dated through my first 2 years of college, keeping things alive with late-night calls and weekend visits. We built something real. By the time I proposed to her last summer, I felt like I'd finally found my place. I saved up for months to buy a simple but beautiful ring, and when I got down on one knee at the park near her apartment, she cried and said yes. I thought I was on top of the world. For a while, it seemed like my parents might have finally come around. Mom started asking Emily about wedding plans and even seemed excited about the dress shopping. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that things could be different, that they might finally see me for who I was. But life has a funny way of reminding you where you stand. It all came crashing down during Thanksgiving. I'd gone home, buzzing with excitement, ready to share wedding plans and talk about my growing internship. Everything felt like it was finally aligning. Then I got the text. "Emily, we need to talk. Starbucks. Urgent." Those words sent a chill down my spine. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she was probably stressed about the wedding, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. When I walked into that Starbucks, I barely recognized her. Emily sat at a corner table, clutching a cup of coffee like it was her lifeline. Her eyes were red and puffy. She didn't even look up at me as I sat down. Before I could ask what was going on, she blurted it out. I'm pregnant. It's Erin's." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I froze, my brain scrambling to make sense of what I'd just heard. I asked her to repeat it, half convinced I'd misheard her. But she said it again, tears streaming down her face as she tried to explain. Apparently, Erin had been showing up at her coffee shop over the summer, spinning stories about how lonely she must have been while I was away. She claimed she didn't even know how it started, but before she knew it, she was tangled up in something she couldn't stop. She kept saying she didn't mean for it to go that far. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood up, walked out, and drove straight home in silence. It felt like my entire life had been set on fire, and I didn't know how to put it out. I don't remember much about the drive back to my parents' house that night. The streetlights blurred into one long streak. The radio hummed as meaningless background noise, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on, casting a warm glow over the front steps. It felt ironic, like everything inside was supposed to be normal and safe when my whole world had just imploded. I sat there for a minute, staring at that light, trying to gather myself. But no amount of deep breathing could prepare me for what I was about to walk into. The second I opened the door, I saw him. Erin. He was slouched on the living room couch, his head down, avoiding eye contact. My mom was hovering over him, rubbing his back and handing him tissues like he was the one who had been wronged. Dad stood by the window, arms crossed, his face a mask of forced indifference. It was like the air in the room had frozen, everyone waiting for me to say something. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. It cut through the silence like a knife. Mom glanced at me, her expression shifting between worry and something that almost looked like guilt. "Luke," she said, her voice all soft and pleading. "Let's sit down and talk about this calmly." "Calmly?" I repeated, my laugh sharp and bitter. "You want to talk about this calmly? My brother—" I pointed at Erin, who still hadn't looked up. "Got my fiancée pregnant, and you want me to be calm?" Erin mumbled something, but his voice was so low it was like he wasn't even trying to be heard. "What?" I snapped. "Speak up, Erin. Be a man for once and say it." Mom jumped in like she was his defense attorney. "Luke, he's taking responsibility for his actions. This is a big step for him. He's going to be a father." "A big step?" I repeated, incredulous. "Are you seriously acting like this is some kind of achievement? He's 24 and still living at home, Mom. He can't even keep a part-time job. And now you're pretending he's ready to be a dad?" Dad finally turned away from the window, sighing like I was the one exhausting him. "Luke, mistakes happen. Erin's trying to do the right thing now. If you really loved Emily, you'd let her go and let them handle this." "Let her go?" My voice cracked, anger bubbling up inside me. "That's your solution? Your son ruins my relationship, and I'm just supposed to step aside and hand her over like it's no big deal?" "Don't talk like that," Mom snapped, her tone scolding. "This is a blessing in disguise. We need to support them as a family." That word, family, set me off. I felt something inside me break. Family? Is that what this is? Because it sure as hell hasn't felt like I've been part of this family in years. Mom's face tightened, her voice taking on that tone she used when she wanted me to shut up and fall in line. "Erin made a mistake, but he's stepping up. That's what matters. You need to stop making this about you." For a second, I couldn't even respond. I just stood there, staring at her, wondering if she even realized what she was saying. Finally, I looked at Erin again. He still hadn't said a word, not even an apology. He just sat there, head down, like a kid who got caught stealing cookies. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking, but firm. "Fine, you want to support him? Go ahead. But don't expect me to stick around for it. I'm done." "Luke, don't say things you don't mean," Mom said, her voice cracking. "I mean every word." I turned to leave, ignoring her protests as she followed me down the hall. When I got to my room, I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started throwing my stuff in. Clothes, my laptop, whatever I could grab. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped a few things, but I didn't stop. "Luke, this is your family," Mom pleaded from the doorway. "No, I said, spinning around to face her. "This is Aaron's family. It hasn't been mine for a long time." Dad showed up then, his arms crossed like I was some unruly teenager throwing a tantrum. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice calm but condescending. "Overreacting?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "Your son slept with my fiancée, and I'm overreacting?" I pushed past them, dragging my suitcase to the car. Neither of them tried to stop me. I think they thought I'd cool off and come back in a few days, but I knew better. This wasn't a fight I could just move on from. This was the end. The drive back to my dorm felt like one long blur. By the time I got there, it was almost midnight, and the campus was quiet. I carried my suitcase up the stairs, unlocked my door, and collapsed on the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stared at the ceiling, numb and empty. The next morning, I made the decision to cut them off completely. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and created new ones. I blocked Aaron, my parents, and Emily on every platform. Every photo of her on my phone went straight into the trash. I didn't even look at them. When friends asked me what happened to the wedding, I kept it simple. "It's off. I don't want to talk about it." That was enough to shut them up. Over the next few weeks, I buried myself in work. Coding had always been my escape, and now it became my lifeline. I threw myself into school assignments, random side projects, and anything that kept my mind busy. My professors noticed the change, and one of them, Dr. Peters, pulled me aside after class one day. "You've been putting in a lot of extra hours," he said, his tone more curious than concerned. "You ever thought about doing research? I've got a cybersecurity project that could use someone with your skills." I said yes without even thinking about it. I didn't care about the resume boost or the potential connections. I just needed something to do. Working with Dr. Peters turned out to be exactly what I needed. For the first time in months, I felt like I was building something real, something that couldn't just be ripped away from me. Meanwhile, life back home was falling apart. I didn't hear about it right away, of course, but my Aunt Valerie started sending me updates. She was my mom's older sister, and the only person in my family who had ever really been in my corner. About 6 months after I cut everyone off, she texted me, "Aaron flunked out of med school. Thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long time, expecting to feel some kind of satisfaction. But all I felt was numb. Of course he flunked out. He could barely handle high school biology, let alone med school. Hearing about Aaron flunking out of med school didn't surprise me. Honestly, I'd expected it. He was never one to put in the hard work. But what did catch me off guard was how quickly things started unraveling for my parents after that. Valerie, my aunt, was the one keeping me in the loop. She'd send the occasional text or email, nothing overly emotional, just the facts. I think she knew I didn't want to hear about them, but she couldn't help herself. Maybe she thought I had a right to know. The next message came a couple of weeks later. Aaron didn't tell them he was failing until he was already kicked out. They're furious, but guess what? They're still covering for him. Apparently, by the time my parents found out, Aaron had already burned through most of the money Dad had saved for his tuition. Instead of holding him accountable, they bent over backward to protect him, blaming the school for being too harsh or claiming Aaron had been under too much pressure. It was always someone else's fault. Valerie kept me updated. "Aaron's back home now," she texted one evening. "Not working, just sitting around while your mom coddles him. Your dad's mad, but he's not doing anything about it." I didn't reply to that one. What was there to say? None of it surprised me. They'd been cleaning up Aaron's messes his whole life. Why would this time be any different? Meanwhile, Emily had given birth to a little girl. According to Valerie, Aaron was barely involved. Sure, he'd show up when Mom nagged him enough, but most of the time, Emily was raising their daughter on her own. Every update just reinforced what I already knew. Aaron would never grow up, and my parents would never stop enabling him. But as their lives fell apart, mine was finally coming together. The work I'd been doing with Dr. Peters had paid off big time. The cybersecurity software we developed caught the attention of a startup, and they offered me a job before I'd even graduated. It wasn't just any job either. It came with equity in the company. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. After graduation, I packed up my life and moved to a new city, far away from everything I'd left behind. The first few months were tough. I was working 12-hour days, living off instant noodles, and sleeping on a mattress on the floor of my apartment. But I didn't care. I was doing something that mattered, building something real. Then, one night I got another message from Valerie. "Aaron's working at Target now. Your mom's worried about him. They don't know what to do." I read the message and then set my phone down, staring at the ceiling. None of it surprised me. Of course, Aaron couldn't keep up with med school. Of course, he couldn't hold a real job. And of course, my parents were still bending over backward to support him. It was the same story, just a different chapter. What did surprise me was how little I cared. A year ago, news like that would have set me off. But now, it was just background noise. I didn't feel sad or angry or vindicated. I just felt tired. Over the next year, the startup I worked for took off. The software we'd built started attracting major investors, and suddenly, we were growing faster than anyone had expected. My hard work didn't go unnoticed, and I was promoted to lead developer. It came with a nice salary bump and enough stability for me to finally upgrade my apartment. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly moving forward. I thought about my family less and less. They weren't part of my world anymore, and I was okay with that. Valerie would still check in every now and then, but I never asked about Aaron or my parents. I didn't want to know. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Hello?" I said hesitantly. "Luke, it's me." My mom's voice came through, shaky and hoarse like she'd been crying. "Please don't hang up." I froze. Hearing her voice after all this time, it was like a punch to the stomach. "How did you get this number?" I asked coldly. "Valerie," she admitted. "I begged her for it. Luke, please listen to me. We need your help. Things have been difficult." Difficult. That word felt like the understatement of the century, but I stayed quiet, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "What's going on?" I asked flatly. Mom took a deep breath, and then the floodgates opened. "Your father's health is bad, Luke. He's been in the hospital twice this year for his heart. We had to sell the house to cover Aaron's mistakes." "Mistakes?" I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "What kind of mistakes?" She hesitated, then blurted it out. "Aaron borrowed $40,000 for a business opportunity. It failed. We had to step in. Between that and your dad's medical bills, we couldn't keep up. We're in a small apartment now. Luke, we don't have anything left." I stared at the wall, her words bouncing around in my head. Selling the house, dipping into their retirement savings, covering for Aaron yet again. It was like a nightmare that never ended. "You chose this," I said finally. My voice was quiet, but the anger was there. "You chose Aaron. You always have. Now you're living with it." "Luke, please," she begged. "Your father isn't well. We're barely scraping by. I'm asking you as your mother. Please help us." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. For a brief moment, I imagined going back, helping them pay their bills, sitting by Dad's hospital bed, pretending we were a real family again. But then I remembered everything, the years of being ignored, the way they defended Aaron. The night I walked out. "I can't help you," I said, my voice steady. "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up before she could say another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her voice replayed in my head over and over, the desperation in her words cutting through the walls I'd spent years building. I told myself I didn't care. They weren't my responsibility. But no matter how many times I said it, I couldn't shake the emptiness. The next day, I called Valerie. "She reached out," I said. "I figured she might," Valerie replied. "How'd it go?" I told her no, I said, my voice flat. "I'm not getting dragged back into their mess." "Good," she said firmly. "You've done enough. Don't let them guilt you into fixing their mistakes." We talked for a while longer, and by the time I hung up, I felt a little lighter. Valerie was right. I didn't owe them anything. They'd made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. After that call with my mom, I buried myself in work even harder than before. My company was growing fast, and we were on the verge of launching a major software update. It gave me something to focus on, something that didn't remind me of everything I'd left behind. But late at night, when the apartment was silent and I was too tired to keep working, my mind wandered. I'd hear my mom's voice, desperate and pleading. I'd picture my dad, older and frailer than I remembered, sitting in some cramped apartment while Aaron loafed around like he always did. It wasn't guilt. I didn't feel like I owed them anything, but there was a heaviness to it all that I couldn't shake. Valerie kept me updated, even when I didn't ask. A week after Mom's call, she sent me an email. They sold their car. Aaron needed money for a new business venture. Your mom cried for hours after they let it go. I stared at the screen, shaking my head. Selling their car, that was so on-brand for my parents. They'd do anything to keep Aaron afloat, even when it hurt them. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still made my stomach churn. The updates kept coming. Valerie told me that Aaron's latest scheme involved selling refurbished electronics online. Apparently, an old friend convinced him it was a sure thing. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Within a month, the whole thing crashed and burned. Aaron lost every penny he'd begged my parents to invest, and this time, they didn't have the money to bail him out. When they said no, Aaron threw a tantrum. According to Valerie, he acted like a spoiled kid who'd been denied a new toy. Mom, of course, tried to console him, telling him they'd figure something out. Dad stayed silent, like always. It was pathetic. The whole thing was so ridiculous I almost laughed when Valerie described it. But it wasn't funny. It was sad. My parents were destroying themselves to protect someone who didn't even care enough to stand on his own 2 feet. While their world was falling apart, mine was flourishing. The software my team developed was a massive hit, attracting investors and earning our startup a ton of attention. We closed a major deal that year, and my equity payout was enough to set me up for years. For the first time, I felt like I was living the life I'd always dreamed of. On my terms, without anyone's help or approval, I celebrated with a few close coworkers, treating them to dinner at a nice restaurant. We laughed, toasted to our success, and talked about the future. It was one of those nights where everything feels right, where you can't help but feel proud of how far you've come. But when I got home, the quiet of my apartment brought it all back. As much as I tried to focus on the life I was building, a part of me was still tethered to the wreckage I'd left behind. Not because I wanted to go back, but because it was impossible to completely forget. A few months later, I got another email from Valerie. This one hit harder than the others. Your dad had another hospital visit. His heart again. He's stable, but your mom's a wreck. I think she's starting to realize they're out of options. I sat at my desk, rereading her words. Dad had always been this towering figure in my childhood, not because he was warm or loving, but because he was steady, unshakable. Seeing him as vulnerable, even just in my imagination, felt strange. But I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't reach out in any way. I told myself they weren't my responsibility, that I couldn't fix decades of bad choices, and I believed it, mostly. Valerie called me a month later. She rarely called unless it was serious, so I answered right away. Luke, she said, her voice heavy. It's your dad. He had another heart episode. It's bad this time. They don't think he's going to recover. I sank into my chair, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't seen my dad in almost 5 years. I hadn't spoken to him since the night I left. And now, he was dying. Your mom's not handling it well, Valerie continued. She's hoping you'll come back. I think she wants you to be there, for him, for her. I stayed silent, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to go. Not for them, but for myself. Maybe it was the closure I needed, the final chapter in a story I never wanted to be part of. But another part of me, the bigger part, knew it wouldn't change anything. My dad wouldn't suddenly apologize for how he treated me. My mom wouldn't magically see me as anything other than the backup kid. And Aaron? He'd still be Aaron. I'm sorry to hear about Dad, I said finally, my voice steady but cold. But I'm not coming back. Valerie didn't argue. I figured as much, she said softly. You've done what you needed to do, Luke. Don't let them drag you back. My dad passed away a week later. Valerie sent me an email to let me know. She said the funeral was small, just family and a few neighbors. Aaron stood by Mom's side, acting like nothing had changed. I didn't go. I thought about it, even considered booking a flight, but in the end, I stayed put. I didn't see the point in showing up. Anything I could have said to my dad had been left unsaid years ago. And honestly, I didn't think I owed anyone an explanation. That day, I went to work like it was any other. My coworkers didn't know what had happened, and I liked it that way. There was something freeing about the idea that I could keep moving forward, unburdened by the weight of my past. A few months later, Valerie called again. This time it was about my mom. "She's not doing great," Valerie said. "Losing your dad hit her hard. And Aaron, well, you know Aaron. He's still there, but he's not helping. She's barely holding it together." I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. "And what does she want me to do?" I asked, my voice even. "She hasn't asked for anything," Valerie replied quickly. "I just thought you should know. But Luke, you don't owe her anything. You've already given enough." Valerie always knew exactly what to say. She never pushed me, never tried to guilt me into anything. She just told me the truth and let me decide what to do with it. "I'll think about it," I said, even though I already knew my answer. In the end, I didn't reach out. I thought about it, sure. Late at night, when my mind wandered, I'd imagine calling her, asking how she was doing, maybe even offering to help. But every time I thought about it, I remembered that living room, the way they defended Aaron, the way they looked at me like I was the problem. Some people say family is everything. I don't believe that. Family is only everything if they treat you like you matter. If they don't, you're allowed to walk away. And that's exactly what I did. By the time my mom called again, it had been nearly 5 years since I'd walked away from my family. 5 years of rebuilding my life, brick by brick, without their interference. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Aaron, not at my parents. I wasn't bitter. I just moved on. But when my phone buzzed late one evening and her name popped up on the screen, I froze. It was the first time she'd tried to contact me since that desperate call months earlier, begging for help. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Luke," she said, her voice hesitant, like she wasn't sure how to start. "It's me. I just wanted to say hi." It threw me off. No begging, no guilt tripping. Just, hi. I didn't respond right away, so she kept going. "How are you? Valerie says you're doing well. She said your company is doing amazing things." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I'm fine, Mom. Busy. Why are you calling?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "I guess I just wanted to hear your voice." It caught me off guard. For years, every interaction with her had been a battle. Her defending Aaron, me fighting to be seen. But this felt different, almost like she didn't know how to handle a conversation without the usual agenda. We talked for a few minutes, the conversation awkward and stilted. She asked about my job, my apartment, and my life in the city. I answered her questions, keeping my tone polite but distant. When she finally said goodbye, I hung up and stared at my phone for a long time. Over the next few weeks, Valerie filled me in on what I already suspected. Mom was struggling. With Dad gone, Aaron had become her whole world, and it was taking its toll. She was drowning in bills, barely scraping by, and Aaron wasn't lifting a finger to help. He was still living with her, unemployed, treating their cramped apartment like his personal flophouse. Valerie didn't try to sugarcoat it. "She's exhausted, Luke, but she won't admit it. And Aaron, he's as useless as ever." Hearing about it didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me tired. Tired of the same cycle repeating itself over and over. Tired of watching my mom destroy herself for someone who didn't deserve it. But as much as I felt for her, I couldn't bring myself to get involved. My life, meanwhile, was better than it had ever been. My company had grown into a major player in the cybersecurity world, and I was at the center of it all. I traveled to conferences, met with investors, and worked on projects I actually cared about. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But even in the middle of all that success, there were moments when my past would creep back in. Like when I'd scroll through Facebook and see old friends posting pictures with their families. Or when coworkers talked about going home for the holidays, and I'd realize I didn't even know where my mom was living anymore. I didn't miss them. Not really. What I missed was the idea of a family. The kind of family that would have been proud of me, supported me, and chosen me when it mattered. But that wasn't the family I had, and I'd come to terms with that. One random Thursday, I got a message request on Facebook. It was from Aaron. I stared at the notification for a long time, debating whether to open it or just delete it and move on. In the end, curiosity won out. The message was short. "Hey, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm sorry. For everything. I'm trying to fix things. Mom's not doing well. Just thought you should know." I read it twice, then set my phone down. He was sorry. After all these years, he finally decided to apologize. But what did that even mean? Was he sorry for sleeping with Emily? For ruining my engagement? For being the center of my parents' world while I was left on the sidelines? Or was he just sorry because his life hadn't turned out the way he thought it would? I didn't reply. I couldn't. The words weren't enough, not after everything. Not long after, Valerie called again. This time, the news was worse. "Luke, it's your mom," she said, her voice softer than usual. "She's not doing well. Between the bills and everything with Aaron, it's just too much. She's not handling it." I took a deep breath, leaning against the kitchen counter. "What do you want me to do, Valerie? I can't fix this." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not asking you to. I just thought you should know." We talked for a while, and as always, Valerie didn't push me. She just told me the truth and let me decide what to do with it. When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring out the window at the city lights. In the end, I didn't reach out to my mom. I thought about it, sure. I even wrote a few texts that I never sent. But every time I tried, I remembered that living room all those years ago. The way they'd rallied around Aaron while I was treated like an afterthought. The way they'd made their choice over and over, and it was never me. Some people might call me heartless for walking away, but I don't think it's heartless to protect yourself. I don't think it's wrong to say, enough. My mom had made her choices, and I had made mine. And while I felt for her, I couldn't save her, not from Aaron, and not from herself. The years kept passing, and with each one, my connection to my family felt fainter, like an old, faded photograph tucked away in a box I never opened. I was no longer angry, and the bitterness I'd carried for so long had softened into something else. Acceptance, maybe, or just exhaustion. Either way, I'd learned to live without them. My life was good. No, it was better than good. It was mine. My company had grown far beyond anything I'd imagined when I first joined that scrappy startup. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving, landing contracts with major players and making waves in the cybersecurity world. I'd climbed higher than I ever thought possible, and it felt like everything I'd built was finally paying off. I'd bought a house, a sleek, quiet place that felt like a sanctuary. I traveled when I wanted, worked on projects I was passionate about, and surrounded myself with people who actually cared about me, friends who felt more like family than my own blood ever had. And yet, there were still moments when my past caught up with me. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it hit like a sucker punch. One of those moments came on a random evening when I was finishing up work. My phone buzzed with a message request. I barely used Facebook anymore, but out of habit, I checked. It was Aaron again. "Hey, Mom's not doing well. I think she really needs you. I'm sorry for everything. Please think about it." I read the message 3 times, my jaw tightening with each pass. The words felt hollow. Too little too late. But there was a part of me, a small nagging part, that wondered if I was being too harsh. Could I really just ignore this? Could I keep pretending they didn't exist? I didn't reply that night. Instead, I sat on my couch, staring at the city lights through the window, replaying every decision I'd made over the years, cutting them off, walking away, building a life without them. A few days later, Valerie called. "It's your mom," she said, her voice calm but serious. "She's in the hospital. It's bad, Luke. They're saying it might be the end." I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the wall. I'd been expecting this, hadn't I? After Dad, after everything, it was only a matter of time. But hearing it out loud still knocked the wind out of me. "She's asking for you," Valerie continued. "She wants to see you." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to go. Maybe this was my chance to say everything I'd been holding on to for years, to ask her why she'd treated me the way she had, to finally get some kind of closure. But the other part of me, the bigger part, knew it wouldn't change anything. Whatever I said, whatever I felt, it wouldn't undo the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten. It wouldn't make her suddenly see me the way she'd always seen Aaron. "I'm sorry, Valerie," I said finally. "I can't do it." Valerie didn't argue. She never did. "I understand," she said softly. "I just thought you should know." Mom passed away 2 days later. Valerie sent me a message to let me know, and I sat in my office for a long time, staring at my computer screen. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry or sad, just empty. The funeral came and went without me. Valerie said it was small, just like Dad's. Aaron was there, of course, playing the role of the grieving son. Valerie told me he even gave a little speech about how much Mom meant to him. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to know. In the months that followed, I threw myself even deeper into my work. My company was expanding into new markets, and there was always something to keep me busy. But late at night, when everything was quiet, I'd find myself thinking about my parents. Not the messy, complicated version of them I'd known as an adult, but the distant memories of when I was a kid, before Aaron became the center of their universe. Before everything went wrong, I thought about the rare times Dad had taken me fishing at the lake, even though neither of us knew what we were doing. I thought about Mom baking cookies in the kitchen, humming along to the radio. Those moments were so small, so fleeting, but they stuck with me. And maybe that was the hardest part, knowing that I'd loved them, even when they hadn't loved me the way I needed. Knowing that no matter how much I built, how far I ran, there'd always be a part of me that wished things had been different. Eventually, I wrote Valerie a message. "Thanks for everything, for always keeping me in the loop, even when I didn't want to hear it. I hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you ever need anything." She replied almost immediately. "Proud of you, Luke. You've built a good life for yourself. Keep going. I'll be okay." Her words stuck with me. Keep going. It was simple, but it felt like permission to let go of the weight I'd been carrying for so long. It's been almost 6 years now since I walked out of that house, and my life looks nothing like it did back then. I have a career I'm proud of, a home that feels like mine, and people who actually see me for who I am. I don't hate my parents anymore. I don't hate Aaron. If anything, I feel sorry for them. Sometimes, freedom doesn't come from getting revenge or proving a point. Sometimes, it's as simple as walking away and choosing to live your life on your terms. That's what I've done. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free.